Part 1, A quiet suburban life in the town of Green Hills. Amanda Matthews was a name everyone knew. At 45, Amanda had built a small empire for herself, running a local event planning business that catered to high-end clients. Her neighbors saw her as a well-composed, successful woman who had everything one could wish for: a stable career, a beautiful home, a loving daughter, and a husband who provided. What they didn't see was the deep void in Amanda's life, an emptiness that would lead her down a path of destruction. Amanda's husband, David Matthews, was a lawyer. Though they once shared dreams and built a life together, their relationship had soured long before their daughter, Sarah, entered high school. David's late hours at the firm left Amanda lonely, longing for the intimacy they once had but which had now faded into a series of brief conversations and cold silences. Their daughter Sarah, 19 years old and full of ambition, was the light of Amanda's life. She was the type of girl who turned heads without realizing it. Smart, beautiful, and destined for greatness, Sarah had been accepted into a prestigious university and had already begun her second year as a psychology major. But it wasn't her academic success or her natural charm that Amanda found herself increasingly obsessed with. It was Sarah's boyfriend, John Matthews. John had been a fixture in the Matthews household for nearly 2 years. At 20, he was tall, athletic, and the epitome of youthful energy. Amanda initially viewed him as just another one of Sarah's fleeting high school crushes, but John stuck around, and it wasn't long before he became more than just her daughter's boyfriend in Amanda's eyes. There was something about his laugh, the way his eyes sparkled when he smiled, and his easygoing nature that caught Amanda off guard. Part 2, The Allure of Youth. It began innocently. John would stop by to see Sarah after her college classes, and Amanda would make small talk while they waited for Sarah to come downstairs. She noticed his friendly banter and how comfortable he seemed around her. Over time, Amanda started dressing differently when she knew John would be coming over. Her outfits became a little more revealing, her makeup a little more precise. She told herself it was harmless. She was, after all, just trying to feel youthful again, but it didn't stop there. One warm afternoon, while Sarah was out with friends, Amanda found herself alone with John in the living room. They were watching a movie, something light-hearted that Sarah had recommended, but the tension between them was anything but light. Amanda had been drinking a glass of wine, and the air felt heavy with unspoken words. As John sat there, unaware of the storm brewing inside Amanda's mind, she made her first bold move. "You know, John," Amanda said softly, her eyes meeting his. "You remind me so much of David when he was your age. So full of life, so full of potential." John looked at her, his brows slightly furrowed, but he smiled politely. "Thanks, Mrs. Matthews. That's a big compliment." Amanda smirked, her lips curling into a subtle grin. "I suppose it is." The next few moments passed in silence, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Amanda's gaze lingered on him longer than it should have. Then, she reached over and gently placed her hand on his arm. "You're very special, John. I hope Sarah realizes how lucky she is." John stiffened, his eyes widening as the touch of Amanda's hand felt heavier than any casual interaction. His heart began to race, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. "Mrs. Matthews, John stammered, unsure of how to continue, but Amanda had already made her decision. Without warning, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his, catching him completely off guard. John froze, his mind racing as the lines blurred between right and wrong. He didn't kiss her back, but he didn't stop her either. Amanda pulled away after a few seconds, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening with the thrill of what she had just done. John's face was a mixture of shock and confusion, but there was something else, something Amanda could sense. "I'm sorry," Amanda whispered, but there was no sincerity in her words. She wasn't sorry. She wanted more. Part 3, The affair begins. For days after that kiss, John couldn't stop thinking about it. He loved Sarah, of that he was sure, but Amanda's boldness left him shaken. There was something intoxicating about the way she made him feel, desired, in control, powerful. And Amanda, sensing his hesitation, took full advantage of it. Their affair began slowly. At first, it was stolen glances, casual touches, and innocent conversations that lasted a little too long. But soon, it escalated. While Sarah was busy with her studies or out with friends, John and Amanda would find moments to be alone. It was thrilling, dangerous even, and neither of them could resist. For Amanda, John became an escape from the monotony of her life. He represented everything she had lost: the youth, the excitement, the passion. She convinced herself that she deserved this. After all, hadn't David neglected her for years? Hadn't she sacrificed enough for her family? John, on the other hand, was trapped in a whirlwind of guilt and lust. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but Amanda had a way of making him forget all the reasons why. She was older, wiser, and more experienced than anyone he had ever been with, and that power imbalance only made the affair more intoxicating. But as their secret relationship deepened, so did the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Amanda became increasingly possessive of John, and what had once been a thrilling secret turned into a dangerous obsession. Part 4. The cracks begin to show. Sarah, oblivious to the affair, began to notice subtle changes in John's behavior. He became distant, preoccupied, and less attentive. At first, she chalked it up to the pressures of his new job, but soon, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, while lying in bed next to John, she decided to confront him. "Is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately." John, caught off guard, quickly composed himself. "Yeah, everything's fine. I've just had a lot on my mind with work and school." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She pressed further, her intuition telling her that there was more to the story. "Are you sure? It feels like you're pulling away from me." John's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to keep his composure. He hated lying to Sarah, but the truth was something she could never know. "I promise, everything's fine." Satisfied for the moment, Sarah let the conversation drop, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Meanwhile, Amanda's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would call John late at night, begging him to come over while Sarah was asleep. She sent him texts, asking for reassurance that he still wanted her, still needed her. John, feeling suffocated, tried to distance himself, but Amanda wouldn't allow it. She became more demanding, more controlling, and the more John pulled away, the tighter her grip on him became. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Part 5. The breaking point. The night that changed everything started like any other. Sarah was out with friends, and John was supposed to meet up with her later. But Amanda had other plans. She had been drinking, again, and in her intoxicated state, she called John, demanding that he come over. "I need to see you," she slurred into the phone. "Now." John hesitated. He knew he shouldn't go. He had promised himself that the affair was over, that he was going to focus on Sarah and repair the damage he had done. But something in Amanda's voice, something desperate and broken, made him agree. When he arrived at the house, Amanda was waiting for him, dressed in a silk robe that barely covered her. The smell of alcohol hung in the air as she approached him, her eyes glazed over with a mix of desire and anger. "You've been avoiding me," she accused, her voice sharp. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Amanda, we can't keep doing this. It's not fair to Sarah. It's not fair to anyone." Amanda's eyes darkened, and for a moment, John thought she might lash out. But instead, she softened, tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "I won't." John felt a pang of guilt, but he stood his ground. "This has to stop. I'm sorry, but it's over." Amanda stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, without warning, she lunged at him, her hands grabbing his shirt as she pulled him towards her. "You can't leave me," she sobbed. "You're mine." Part 5 continued. Amanda's descent into obsession. Amanda tightened her grip on John's shirt, her face inches from his. Her breath was warm, but it smelled of alcohol and desperation. John stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. He had thought about this moment for weeks, how to end the affair once and for all, but Amanda's tears and frantic behavior made it harder than he had anticipated. "I'm not yours," John said slowly, carefully choosing his words. "I belong with Sarah. This was a mistake. We both know that." Amanda's face twisted in pain. She released him suddenly, staggering back, almost as if his words had physically wounded her. She ran a hand through her hair, her fingers trembling. "A mistake?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Is that what you think this was?" John hesitated, but he knew he had to be firm. "Yes, Amanda. It was a mistake." Amanda's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and sadness. She had always been in control, of her business, of her family, of her life. But now, the one thing she wanted most, John, was slipping through her fingers. "No," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "No, you're wrong." John watched as Amanda's expression hardened. The vulnerability he had seen moments ago vanished, replaced by a steely determination. He knew he had to leave. "Now I'm going, Amanda," he said, taking a step towards the door. "This is over." But before he could reach the door, Amanda moved faster than he anticipated. She grabbed a nearby vase from the table and hurled it at him. The vase shattered against the wall, missing him by inches. John turned to face her, his heart pounding. "Amanda, what the hell are you doing? You can't leave me," she screamed, her voice filled with rage. "You don't get to walk away from this." John's instinct was to run, but before he could make another move, Amanda charged at him. Her fists pounded against his chest, her sobs filling the room. John tried to grab her wrists, to stop her from hitting him, but she was relentless, her emotions boiling over into physical violence. "Amanda, stop!" John shouted, but she didn't listen. Her punches became weaker as her energy drained, and finally, she collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs. John held her awkwardly, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to hurt her, but he also didn't want to stay any longer than he had to. After what felt like an eternity, Amanda pulled away, wiping her tear-streaked face with trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what came over me." John took a deep breath, stepping back from her. "I need to go," he said firmly. "This has to end, Amanda. For both our sakes." Amanda didn't respond. She simply stood there, staring at him with hollow eyes as he turned and walked out the door. Part 6, The calm before the storm. For the next few days, John avoided Amanda. He didn't answer her texts or calls, and when Sarah asked why he seemed distant, he brushed it off, saying he was just stressed about work. But inside, John felt like a ticking time bomb. He knew that Amanda wasn't going to let him go so easily, and the guilt of his betrayal was eating away at him. Amanda, on the other hand, was unraveling. The calm, composed woman that the community knew was now consumed by obsession. She couldn't stop thinking about John, about the way he had rejected her, the way he had walked out of her life as if she meant nothing. Her thoughts spiraled into darker and darker places, and soon, she couldn't tell where her love for John ended and her anger began. One night, after several glasses of wine, Amanda made a decision. If she couldn't have John, then no one could. Part 7, The night of the murder. It was a warm summer evening when the murder took place, but the events leading up to it were cold and calculated. John had just returned from a night out with Sarah. They had gone to dinner at their favorite restaurant, but something about the night felt off. John was quieter than usual, his mind elsewhere, and Sarah could sense it. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked as they walked up to the front door of her house. "Yeah," John said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Sarah didn't push any further, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She kissed him goodnight and went inside, leaving John to walk back to his car alone. As John approached his car, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned, squinting into the darkness, but saw nothing. Shaking his head, He unlocked his car and slid into the driver's seat, but before he could start the engine, the car door was yanked open, and a figure loomed over him. It was Amanda. John's heart raced as he tried to scramble out of the car, but Amanda was faster. She had a knife in her hand, one she had taken from her own kitchen earlier that evening, and before John could react, she lunged at him. The first stab was quick, piercing his side. John cried out in pain, grabbing at the wound, but Amanda didn't stop. She stabbed him again, and again, each blow fueled by the rage and betrayal she felt. John tried to fight back, but his strength was fading fast. Blood poured from his wounds, pooling in the seat beneath him as his vision blurred. He could barely make out Amanda's face as she stood over him, her chest heaving with exertion, her eyes wild with a mix of triumph and sorrow. "You don't get to leave me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't get to do this to me." With one final thrust, Amanda plunged the knife into John's chest, and everything went silent. Part 8, The Aftermath. Amanda stood over John's lifeless body, her hands covered in blood. For a moment, she just stared at him, her mind racing as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. She had killed him. She had killed the man she loved. Panic set in. Amanda quickly wiped the knife on her dress and shoved it into her purse. She couldn't think straight, her mind was a whirlwind of fear and regret. She had to get out of there. Without another glance at John's body, Amanda turned and fled into the night. The next morning, Sarah found John's body slumped over in his car, covered in blood. The sight was too much for her to bear, and she collapsed in the driveway, screaming for help. The police arrived within minutes, and it didn't take long for them to piece together what had happened. There were security cameras in the neighborhood, and Amanda had been seen entering John's car just before the murder. Amanda was arrested later that day, her once perfect life now shattered. As she sat in the interrogation room, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared at the table in front of her, her mind numb from the weight of her actions. The trial that followed was a media sensation. The story of a mother's affair with her daughter's boyfriend, and the grisly murder that followed, captivated the nation. Amanda was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah, devastated by the betrayal of both her mother and her boyfriend, left Green Hills and never looked back. Part 9, Reflections. Years later, people in Green Hills still talk about the murder. It's a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly lives can spiral out of control when love, obsession, and betrayal collide. Amanda Matthews now sits in a prison cell, alone with her thoughts. She often wonders how things could have been different, if only she had made different choices, if only she had let John go. But it's too late now. For Sarah, the pain never truly goes away. She's moved on, built a new life for herself, but the scars of that summer night still linger. She avoids relationships, afraid of getting too close to anyone again. The betrayal she suffered cut too deep, and as for John, his life was cut tragically short by a woman who couldn't bear to lose him. His dreams of the future, his love for Sarah, all of it was taken away in an instant.
In the serene town of Ashford, Virginia, known for its picturesque landscapes and tight-knit community, a dark and twisted story began to unfold in the autumn of 2023. What started as an unusual romance between a 21-year-old man and a 70-year-old woman would soon spiral into a chilling tale of manipulation, greed, and murder that would leave the town reeling. Eli Thompson was a young man with a quiet, introspective nature. Born and raised in Ashford, Eli was well known among the locals as the boy who always had his nose buried in a book. He had recently graduated from community college, unsure of what direction his life should take. His father had passed away when he was just a child, leaving his mother, Clara, to raise him on her own. They lived in a modest old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, struggling to make ends meet. Clara, a loving but overburdened woman, worked multiple jobs to support them, but the financial strain was ever present. Eli spent much of his time in the town's small library, where he could escape into the worlds of the novels he loved. It was here that he first met Rose Montgomery, a wealthy 70-year-old widow known for her eccentricities and her vast fortune. Rose, a former socialite who had moved to Ashford after the death of her fourth husband, was a striking figure in town. She was always impeccably dressed, with an air of authority that both intimidated and fascinated those around her. Despite their age difference, Rose and Eli began to form an unlikely friendship. Rose, drawn to Eli's youth and innocence, began inviting him over to her grand estate for long conversations over tea. Eli, feeling the weight of his responsibilities at home and desperate for an escape, found himself captivated by Rose's stories of a life filled with glamour and excitement. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened, and by the end of the summer, Eli shocked the town by announcing that he and Rose were engaged. The news spread through Ashford like wildfire. People couldn't understand why a young man like Eli would choose to marry someone old enough to be his grandmother. Some whispered that he was after her money, while others speculated that Rose was using him to stave off her loneliness. Regardless of the reason, the town was abuzz with gossip. The wedding was an extravagant affair, held in the garden of Rose's sprawling mansion. The event was lavish, with no expense spared, fine dining, live music, and floral arrangements that could rival those of a royal wedding. Eli, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look older than his years, seemed out of place. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a nervous energy that didn't go unnoticed by the guests. Rose, on the other hand, was the epitome of confidence, beaming as she walked down the aisle in a designer gown. As the weeks passed after the wedding, it became apparent that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Eli had moved into Rose's mansion, but he quickly found himself isolated from his old life. Rose's demands grew more intense, and she became increasingly controlling. Eli, once a free spirit, now spent most of his days confined to the mansion, cut off from his friends and family. Rose monitored his every move, making sure he adhered to her strict rules and expectations. Eli's mother, Clara, grew increasingly concerned. She hadn't seen her son in weeks and was troubled by the change in his behavior. When she tried to visit him, Rose would make excuses, saying Eli was busy or unwell. Clara's worries deepened, and she began to suspect that something was terribly wrong. One rainy evening in November, Eli managed to slip away from the mansion and made his way back to his childhood home. He arrived soaked and trembling, barely recognizable to his mother. Eli confided in Clara that he was trapped in a situation he didn't know how to escape. He described how Rose's behavior had become erratic, and how she had started giving him pills to help him relax. Eli suspected that Rose was drugging him to keep him compliant, but he felt powerless to resist. Clara, horrified by what she heard, urged Eli to leave Rose and come back home. But Eli, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his fear of Rose, was unsure of what to do. He agreed to stay with Clara for a few days to clear his mind and decide his next steps. However, before they could make any concrete plans, Rose appeared at their doorstep, demanding Eli return with her. Eli, caught in a state of confusion and fear, reluctantly complied. The next morning, Clara found a letter in her mailbox from an anonymous sender. The letter contained chilling details about Rose's past marriages. All of her previous husbands had died under mysterious circumstances, and Rose had inherited their fortunes. The letter warned Clara that Eli's life was in danger and that she needed to act quickly if she wanted to save him. Desperate and frightened, Clara took the letter to the local police. Detective Samuel Hayes, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for his tenacity, was assigned to the case. Hayes began looking into Rose's history and quickly uncovered a series of suspicious events surrounding the deaths of her former husbands. Each death had been ruled as natural causes or accidents, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. As Hayes dug deeper, he discovered that Rose had a history of manipulating young, vulnerable men into relationships, only to discard them when they were no longer useful. Her wealth and social standing had always kept her out of trouble, but this time the evidence was starting to pile up against her. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Eli's situation was becoming increasingly dire. Rose had grown paranoid, fearing that Eli was planning to leave her. She began keeping him sedated with higher doses of the pills, ensuring that he was too disoriented to think clearly. Eli, aware that his time was running out, tried to reach out to his mother, but Rose had confiscated his phone and cut off all communication with the outside world. Detective Hayes, realizing the urgency of the situation, secured a warrant to search Rose's mansion. When the police arrived, they found Eli in a near catatonic state, heavily drugged and unable to stand on his own. Rose, maintaining her composure, claimed that Eli was unwell and that she had been taking care of him. However, the discovery of a hidden stash of prescription drugs in Rose's bedroom, drugs that matched those found in Eli's system, was enough to arrest her on suspicion of attempted murder. As the investigation continued, more damning evidence came to light. The letter Clara had received was traced back to a former housekeeper of Rose's, who had witnessed similar behavior in the past but had been too afraid to speak out. This witness provided crucial testimony about how Rose had manipulated her previous husbands, leading to their untimely deaths. With the case against her mounting, Rose finally broke down during an intense interrogation. She admitted to drugging Eli but insisted it was only to keep him calm and prevent him from leaving her. She denied any intention to kill him, claiming she was merely trying to protect their relationship. Rose Montgomery was charged with multiple counts, including attempted murder, fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. The trial, which began in early 2024, attracted national attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, all eager to hear the details of this bizarre and tragic case. The prosecution painted Rose as a manipulative predator who preyed on young men, using her wealth and influence to control them. They presented evidence of her past marriages, each ending in the suspicious death of her husbands, and argued that Eli had narrowly escaped the same fate. The defense, led by a high-profile attorney, attempted to portray Rose as a lonely, misunderstood woman who had simply fallen in love with a younger man. They claimed that Eli had willingly entered into the relationship, and that any drug use was consensual. However, the overwhelming evidence and the testimonies of those who had seen the darker side of Rose's character were too much to overcome. In the end, the jury found Rose guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eli, who had spent weeks in a hospital recovering from the physical and emotional trauma, eventually returned home to his mother. The experience had left him deeply scarred, but he was determined to rebuild his life, far away from the horrors he had endured. The town of Ashford, once again peaceful on the surface, remained haunted by the memory of what had transpired. The case served as a stark reminder of how easily darkness can hide behind a facade of wealth and respectability. For Eli and Clara, life would never be the same, but they found solace in the fact that justice had finally been served. As for Rose, she spent the rest of her days in a maximum security prison, isolated and forgotten, a far cry from the life of luxury and control she had once enjoyed. Her story became a cautionary tale in Ashford, a chilling example of how manipulation and greed can lead to unimaginable tragedy.